Hello, and welcome to another supernatural session. This is where I take your questions live or in advance and then answer them in this format where we can all benefit from understanding what other people are asking, what we're all wondering about, what we're learning about, what we're working on. I love this, and I love the variety of issues that come in. So today we're going to talk a lot about intermittent fasting, and we may also talk about adaptogens versus herbs. This is a big topic and something that Supernatural and I are going to cover a lot in the future. So we will see how much time we have after I get through some of these initial questions. Just a reminder that I am Rochelle. I'm a registered herbalist recognized by the American Herbalist Guild and the founder of Supernatural, which is a New York, Brooklyn based apothecary, product line, educational hub. And then, of course, we are global online, bringing you modern herbalism and everything you need to know to navigate the space better. There's so much to know, but it's really it's not, it's not prohibitive. It is not something that we can't all use. It's not something that we shouldn't all use. Herbalism is really meant to be a lifestyle. And if I get my way, then everybody will understand a little bit more about herbalism and be using plants for better health. So with that, I'm going to dive into one of our first questions that was sent in ahead of time. And this is, can you address intermittent fasting? You started a conversation earlier, so in a previous session, about blood sugar stability, which I'm a big fan of. And maybe this relates, and it does. They are asking, I'd like to try intermittent fasting, but I'm wondering what the heck do I do from 5:30 a.m. when I wake up until the first meal at noon? How cranky will I be? How can I get around this? Is coffee okay? Coffee with cream? What about only eating between 12 and 8 p.m.? The first part of the day has me stumped. So, very good questions, very valid concerns. And as somebody who's been practicing intermittent fasting for 8 years or something like that, I can attest that you can do it and you won't be cranky, and it's not that hard. Just like herbalism, it's not that hard. So for intermittent fasting, so the mention of an eating window from 12 to 8 p.m. is great. That is pretty standard for intermittent fasting. And for those of you who are not familiar, intermittent fasting is doing a smallish fast on a daily basis or on a regular basis. And we're just taking a really long break between dinner and breakfast. And for a lot of that time, you're sleeping. So that makes it easier. And then there are some, periods of time after dinner and before breakfast where we're awake. And what are we doing? Fasting, I don't think I'll get into all the benefits now, but for you who asked this question and for everybody who's interested in intermittent fasting, I actually have a talk on my website. I gave a whole hour conversation about intermittent fasting and highly recommend everybody check that out. So that will give you a good foundation into how to do intermittent fasting and what are the different types of fasts. But to answer these questions and really to pull in some herbal supports, I would say that, the effect of intermittent fasting on blood sugar, first of all, to address that question, is generally very positive. So we need to be eating the right foods when we are eating, and we need to, be doing our fast right. But it's been shown to be a very positive effect on blood sugar. And again, you want to do it right, but when it's done right, it can be really helpful. So what that means is that as we practice it, it gets easier. And it gets easier in part because our blood sugar is stabler. So we are craving less and we're having less of these peaks and valleys, these spikes and crashes of blood sugar that drive us to be starving or hangry or cranky or dizzy or all these things that are disruptive and that would make it's super hard or impossible to fast. So you can't necessarily just jump into a long fast. You have to do it kind of gradually over time. Your body gets accustomed to the fact that you're fasting, and then it becomes very easy. So for me, for example, I've been fasting for about 16 hours for many, many years. And I have zero hunger, for that whole period of time. And then all of a sudden, hungry. And I look at my, clock or whatever. I don't have a watch. I don't wear a watch, but I look at the time and it's been 16 hours, to the minute. So your body's really, really adjusts to it. The other thing that happens in fasting and in other nutritional practices, other diets, our body becomes accustomed to burning fat for fuel instead of burning glucose for fuel, because it burns through all the glucose and then it switches over to the fat. So this is being in fat burning mode, which tends to be very stable as well. Our brains tend to like it. Our energy levels tend to stay very stable. And it's a really nice switch for your body to know how to make. Now, I don't recommend that we all go practice the ketogenic diet. I think it's right for certain times and places, but for most people long term, it's not a great idea. But in the ketogenic diet, you do see the ability to burn fat for fuel because we're just not eating any carbohydrates, right? We need carbohydrates, but that's a separate topic for another day. So your body gets better at burning fat for fuel. Your blood sugar gets more stable. Your body is doing all this cellular cleanup, and you are feeling lighter and brighter and more energetic. And you're like, what the hell do I do from 5:30 a.m. to noon? And can I have coffee, and all those other questions? So yes, you can have coffee. And this is partly where bulletproof coffee became such a popular thing. Bulletproof coffee and intermittent fasting kind of hit the world at the same time, from mainly the same source. Then it's the same kind of person and area. Now, of course, they've been practiced all over the world for thousands of years, but this combination, became a wellness hit because they go together. So bulletproof coffee on its own is not as productive as bulletproof coffee when you're fasting. Kind of the point of doing that is that it elongates your fast. Now, coffee is fine, tea is fine, water is fine, electrolyte powders and stuff are fine. The things that you can't have and don't want to have when you're fasting are foods and things that are caloric. So green juices, fruit juices, no to either of those. A latte, no. What else do we drink in the morning? Soups or broths or any of those things, or snacks? No, because then you're not fasting, right? Now, the curious little exception is this MCT oil in the bulletproof coffee, and then the butter. You're like, well, that's definitely a food. You're right, it is. It is a food. The way that works is MCT oil. I think the simplest way to describe it is think of it like a supplement. So like you're taking a vitamin, kind of like you're taking a fish oil, as opposed to you're eating a fat. So it's not the same as olive oil. It's so processed that it tends to kind of skip digestion and be absorbed into the body and used as fuel. It allows our body to have a little fuel, but not be eating. So it's a cheat, but so what? Because having some MCT oil in the coffee, or not in coffee if you don't drink coffee, might allow you to fast, for the full 15, 16 hours and be really comfortable and feel really great. And also be feeding your brain really healthy fat and feeding your gut some healthy fat. And those benefits outweigh the fact that you had half of a tablespoon of MCT oil or whatever. Butter is just a flat out like cheat. Like it's just butter in your coffee. But the reason why people sort of allow that is because fat, again, is so kind of stable, and so little of it can give you such a long burn that, again, they're like, well, the trade-off of me having a little fat in my coffee and being able to fast a lot longer is worth it to me, as opposed to, not having it. My personal practice is to use half of a tablespoon of MCT oil in my herbal coffee blend, and that's it. I don't do butter, and I don't make the bulletproof coffee that's like 2 tablespoons of oil and 2 tablespoons of butter, or however much. It's a lot of fat. So that, for me, that right there actually exceeds my daily fat content total. So like, I don't do that. If you're a big person, then that ratio might make sense for you. Otherwise, maybe just a little bit, or just have coffee, or just have tea, or just have water. Let's see. And then what do we do between 5 a.m. and noon when we're having our coffee and our water and some of our supplements or whatever else? I take my probiotics in the morning. Exercise. Exercising in a fasted state is fantastic. I prefer to exercise in a fasted state. It's wonderful. Lots of benefits to that. You can go to work. Lots of us go to work then. You can sip on tea and, your beverages. And, the biggest thing that we can do is be liberated from food. Why do we need to be eating breakfast if we're not hungry? If we're just fasting, we're taking a break. Why do we need to be eating? We don't. We don't always need to be eating. And we tend to live in a culture that is always eating. Snacking, socializing is always around food. Everything is around food. There's food all the time, food. And sometimes we just need a break. Our digestion loves it. Our skin loves it. Again, done right, our brain loves it. Our blood sugar balance loves it. Taking breaks from food doesn't mean you're eating less throughout the day. It might, but you're just eating for less hours of the day. And then what can you do? Whatever you want. You're free. You're free. And that's one of the greatest things I think about intermittent fasting, is that it liberates us. It liberates us from having to have food, a snack, having to feed blood sugar that's going like this, just taking a break. And when you get comfortable with it, travel is really easy. Like, I don't have to try to find food in the airport, which is basically impossible, or like get a good plane meal, which is basically impossible, because I'm practicing my intermittent fast right now, And now this is not to encourage disordered eating. And if you have a history of disordered eating or on that spectrum, then this may not be a practice for you. It may not be. Just like tracking food in a food tracker or a food journal is not a practice for everyone. So that's something to be mindful of. But if we're doing it well, if we're eating the same amount of food during the day, and it's really, really, really good food, and we're just eating it between 12 and 8 or 11 and 7 or something like that, then you're in great shape. And the last note that I wanted to make is to not just start with 16 hours, because that tends to be very long. So if you're not doing any intermittent fasting, start with 12 hours. And if that's easy, go to 13. If that's easy, go to 14. If that's easy, go to 15. You get it. After 16 hours, I think that's long enough to do on like a daily basis. And if you're interested in 24-hour fasts, juice cleanses, which are not really fasts, but they get called fasts, water fasts or longer fasts, that's a separate conversation. That's not intermittent fasting. That's just fasting. And it's a bit more serious. It needs to be understood, and it needs to be practiced with some either really good education or some kind of medical support. So that is my spiel on intermittent fasting. Now let's talk about herbs that can support intermittent fasting. So some of my favorite are actually some of the herbs that I talked about last time for blood sugar support. So herbs that can help support blood sugar stability are going to then make your intermittent fasting sessions easier, right? So cinnamon, 1 to 2 teaspoons of cinnamon a day, super, super helpful. Any herbs that contain berberine, hibiscus is a great one. And then the other thing that you can do in your fasting period, if you want to really support your brain, is to use herbal nootropics. So, nootropics are kind of cognitive enhancers, right? So you could be using lion's mane mushroom in your, morning beverage, or separately, you could be having holy basil, rosemary, bacopa. You could have a little bit of mucuna. That's that dopamine bean, and dopamine is really good for focus. So having nootropics in the morning, you could get a little bit of light therapy, go outside. You could use some essential oils if you wanted to. Peppermint is great for waking up. Any kind of mint, actually. Also, grapefruit can be very stimulating. You could also use herbal bitters if you want. I would use herbal bitters toward the end of your fast because they're going to start to stimulate your digestion. So using your herbal bitters like in the last half an hour of your fast is a great way to say, okay, digestion, wake up, get ready. We're about to eat now. It's been 16 hours. Let's do this well, right? So you take your herbal bitters and then you are ready to digest when you eat. And then the last note that I would say is when you do eat, eat slowly. If you have a smoothie, sip it, swish it, chew it, use a spoon, all those things. Eat slowly. It's not a great idea to go from 16 hours without food to knocking back a whole big thing and then letting your digestive system handle it from there. So that's it. So I'm going to stop there. So many things we could say about intermittent fasting, but hopefully that was a good refresher. Check out my event about intermittent fasting if you want a full hour of this. And I'm going to save the conversation about adaptogens versus herbs for a separate session because it deserves its own time and place. Thank you so much for joining. Let me know what other questions you have. Send them in, leave comments. Wherever I am, you can send your questions and I will continue answering them for as long as, the internet allows. Take care, be well, and find a plant to use in your life this week.